Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much to the organizers of this really important conference, and thank you for inviting me to be part of the proceedings. I'm really honored and excited to share some of my thinking on the topic. Now, I know that in what I have sent you, yes?
Can you open your camera, please, that we can also see you?
Did I not?
We see you. No problem.
Okay. Now. Okay.
We can see.
Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic.
Oh, it's
fantastic.
Brilliant.
Lovely. Okay, fantastic. Okay, but given that I only have less than 20 minutes, I will focus on the first part of what I have promised in my paragraph, and I'll focus on the Sunni Shi'i element. And maybe in the subsequent question and answer question, we can perhaps explore the additional civilizational hybridity element, but I will not have time to do both, unfortunately, I think. Essentially, I have been doing a lot of work on something called the theory of progressive Islam. My PhD thesis was based on that, and I have also written a number of articles and monographs. And I see a lot of potential in how the theory of progressive Islam approaches the Islamic interpretive tradition. I see a lot of potential in helping, if we approach the Islamic interpretative tradition from the perspective of progressive Muslim thought, I think there are a lot of resources and there is a lot of ideas that we can use to help create a stronger Islamic ecumenism and try to minimize and hopefully overcome the sectarianism that has been rearing its ugly head over the last decade and a half, in particular in many parts of the Muslim world. So I will start, that's my main aim, to explain to you in what way can the theory of progressive Islam help overcome Sunni Shia sectarianism and promote Islamic ecumenism. I start with a very, very brief overview. And as I said, should you be interested in any more details, you can refer to some of my publications or maybe in Quran and, in the question and answer session, we can discuss it in some more detail. So what do I mean by progressive Islam? Well, I guess one of the easiest way for you to understand what I mean by progressive Islam is to look at some of the leading authorities that I consider to be part of progressive Islam or progressive Muslim thought. I have given you some examples of the main scholars from the 20th century. I didn't want to go earlier than 20th century. We could actually go back all the way to the very beginnings of Islam and look at some of, and I will actually, in my next slide, I will show you some of what I call delineating features of progressive Muslim thought. And those of you who are familiar with Islamic interpretative tradition, they will be able to kind of find their feet and understand as to, okay, I see what he means. But one good way of introducing progressive Islam, I think, is by providing some leading scholars or what I think are, the leading theoreticians or behind this approach to Islam. As you can see, they come from many parts of the Muslim world. They come from both Sunni and Shia backgrounds, and many of them are female Muslim scholars. Yeah. More specifically, when I talk about progressive Islam, the way I have tried to delineate and demarcate and explain what I mean by progressive Islam, and as I said, I have published 2 books on this topic. One way to kind of think about it is to show you some of the main, let's say, delineating features, or one of the main, let's say, some of the main characteristics of this approach to the Islamic tradition. Now, I will not go into a lot of details as to what each one of these means right now, because in the rest of my presentation, I'm actually going to look at each one of these elements and say specifically how they can help in overcoming Islamic sectarianism and transcending some of the primarily religious, but to a certain extent also political divides that can become, can be seen as being implicated in this sectarianism. All right. So, but the broader context, I'll start with the broader context. Basically, as many of us who work in the interfaith context, we know that over the last 20 years in particular, I think, there have been many initiatives globally among different religions to get together and try to engage in interfaith dialogue, and different types of ecumenical initiatives have been taking place. We see this both at the activist, like let's say the level of activist, more like a dialogue, non-academic level, where people of various backgrounds who are not academics are getting together informally or formally to meet other people from different faith backgrounds, to learn about their religious traditions. But also we are seeing increasingly over the last 10 years in particular, that there are, at an academic level, we are seeing the emergence of new disciplines, and they are being taught at prestigious universities around the world. So, we not only do we have comparative theology, which is something that has existed for a relatively long period of time, but we also seeing new courses, new degrees in interfaith dialogue and interreligious studies being introduced. So this is really exciting and wonderful from my perspective. But unfortunately, when it comes to intrafaith dialogue between Muslims, there are very few initiatives that we can point to that have tried to kind of really promote Islamic ecumenism. I have made reference to one of the recent articles that appeared in the journal Religions, it provides a very in-depth overview of the lack of Islamic ecumenism. Of course, we have the Amman message that was signed by many Sunni and Shia scholars back in 2008, if I'm not mistaken. But apart from that initiative, really, there is not a lot of, there are not many initiatives that are happening within this Islamic ecumenism field, either at a grassroots level or academically speaking. So we could ask ourselves the question, why is that the case? Why don't we have these initiatives? So one could say that, some reasons could be political. We have the ongoing rivalry, for example, in the Middle East between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Also, the so-called war on terror has also contributed to Islamic sectarianism. As we all know, that groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, they were in many ways a product of the forces that were unleashed when Bush decided to wage his war on, So the reasons can be both political, but also they can also be religious in nature. We cannot deny this fact that in some contexts, yes, political climate can actually trigger these unresolved questions that we have, that the Islamic interpretative tradition had to deal with for a very long time. So under certain political, economic, and social conditions, we see that these flames of sectarianism are being given more oxygen. So my role, my presentation focuses more on the religious element, not so much on the political element. But I do accept, and I do think that the political element is also very strong. But I don't have the expertise, nor do I have, and I have, to offer some insights into the political side of things. So I focus on the religious element. So how can progressive Islam help us in promoting Islamic ecumenism? And also, what are some of the implications? How can we use progressive Muslim thought to foster peace education within the context of Islamic ecumenism? Yeah, in particular. All right. As a broad statement, I would like to just to make a few preliminary points. First of all, is that whether we like it or not, and I myself come from a Muslim background. I was born in Bosnia, brought up as a Muslim. I take my Islam very seriously. I mean, every serious scholar of the Islamic interpretative and intellectual tradition, Islamic history, knows that there have always been episodes of let's say theological debates and disagreements that between the Sunni and the Shi'i scholars. And they have not disappeared, as I said. Often people who are engaging in these apologetic disputes between Sunnis and Shi'is themselves do not come from a very objective perspective. They themselves are strongly committed to either the Sunni narrative or the Shi'i narrative, and often it is a question of, apologetics, people engaging in one kind of apologetics or the other. So there is not that much objectivity and academic approaches to the question. Those of us who are familiar with Islamic history know that Sunnis and Shi'is differ on a number of crucial questions that have arisen from the very inception of Islam, pertaining to the nature and the location of religious authority. And we know that these questions actually are what constitutes and what has given rise to specific Sunni and Shi'i theologies and political theologies, if you like. All right. So the first thing that I want to say about progressive Islam and its theory is that the way it conceptualizes itself and its approach to Islam, it doesn't consider any of these questions from history that we have inherited as being normative. It is not something that is essential to being a Muslim. Yeah? They are seen as purely historical. How can that be? How can they do that? On one basis of approach to Islam, can they consider to these specific beliefs and doctrines that we find in both Sunni and Shi'i Islam to be purely historical and not normative? Well, that's what I would like to explain in the rest of my presentation. So the first pillar of progressive Islam is something called, as you can see, creative, critical, and innovative thought, based on openness and methodological fluidity. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is that progressive Islam, in terms of its worldview, it has an open worldview. And in a sense that it is not constrained by particular narratives and interpretations of the sacred past. We all know that both Sunni and Shi'i orthodoxies, their locus of authority and the kind of the center of gravity of their theologies is always justified and found in the past, on a particular interpretation of the past. Then there are a number of reasons why that is the case, and I don't really have time to go into that. But that is why they keep operating within the epistemological, methodological, and if you wish, ontological framework. So in Sunni Islam, it could be the idea of following in the footsteps of the so-called Salaful Salih and the Manhaj, or whatever, however we interpret that. In this case of Shia Islam, it is, either the, one or the other version of the Imamate theology, depending upon which sect you follow. So, and because of both of these orthodoxies are heavily invested in a particular interpretation of the past that is constantly imposing itself upon the present and the future and the way they can think about what Islam could ever possibly mean. So they can never break out of that fold because of the usul al-fiqh, because of the kalam, because of the usul al-din. They are unable to, they don't consider alternative approaches to these Islamic sciences to be able to break out of that mold. Whereas when it comes to progressive Islam, they invest in a particular ilm al-kalam, in a particular usul al-fiqh that, although it is continuous with some of the ideas that we find in both Sunni and Shia Islam, it is able to go beyond them and build upon them, epistemologically and also methodologically. So it still uses the raw resources from the past, but it's able to use them in such a way to have an open worldview. Now, as I said, I am unable to go into any detail about this, but it has to do with the way progressive Islam approaches the concept of tanzil and wahi and its manhaj, and the way it approaches the concept of nubuwwah, So it uses ideas that we find in the past and kind of amplifies them and builds upon them in order to come up with, let's say, an Islamic theology that is able to, as I said, go beyond the confines of the mainstream Sunni and Shia orthodoxies. As I said earlier on, Sunni and Shia orthodoxies both are epistemologically pre-modern because they invest very heavily in a particular interpretation of the sacred past, and they allow it to dictate their understandings of the Islam in the present and in the future very strongly. And that has caused a number of tensions between the Sunni and Shia orthodoxies and that of the modern concept of human rights, in relation to minorities, in relation to women, in relation to freedom of belief and freedom of expression. So progressive Muslims' approach to the Islamic tradition, again, because it is based on a historicist and a contextualist approach, it is epistemologically modern, and it is able to conceptually argue that there is that modern human rights schemes can and are compatible with Islamic ideas pertaining to human dignity, for example. And I have actually, in some of my writings, I have used the work of, let's say, Professor Abdul Aziz Saqadina, who has a Shia background, or Al-Jabiri, the famous Moroccan scholar, Professor Hassan Hanafi from Cairo, or let's say, who else? An-Na'im. I have used ideas of these scholars to actually say that, this is possible. If we adopt a particular approach to, a contextualist and a historicist approach, we can actually, it is possible to conceptually make these contemporary human rights schemes compatible with the Islamic tradition. Another important aspect of progressive Islam is something that I call Islamic liberation theology. So this is the, the works of Professor, for example, Farid Esak or Shabbir Akhtar, or Professor Hassan Hanafi or Ali Ashkar engineer from India. They have all argued that Islam is actually not so much about, yes, there is a theological component, but it is also very much about orthopraxis. It's about developing a society that is based on justice and peace and compassion. Yeah. So we need to use Islamic religious beliefs, theological beliefs, for the purposes of creating such a society. Yeah. Maybe I'm running out of time. There are a number.
I can give you 2 minutes. I mean,
2 minutes. So progressive Islam also affirms the idea of religious pluralism. Yeah. For a number of different reasons. So how does all of this? How does all of this contribute towards peace? Well, we know that over the last couple of years, decade or so, we have had conflicts among Muslims that have used the sectarian card. They have used the sectarian card to actually project or promote ideas of religious supremacy and to engage in sectarian conflict. We know the stories of Iraq and Syria and other places. Very unfortunate, very unfortunate. So if we are able to transcend the Sunni and Shia orthodoxies, then we can actually take out the oxygen from sectarian, justifications based on religion. I'm not saying that they are purely based on religion, but the religious element can be taken out and extinguished. Second point is, if we accept that modern human rights schemes are compatible conceptually with Islamic human rights schemes, then our societies can be based upon principles of constitutional parliamentary democracy that guarantee minority rights regardless of your religious affiliation, regardless whether or not you're majority or minority. So it's based upon this concept of siyasa sharia or the maqasid of al-siyasa al-sharia. Islamic liberation theology tells us that we need to protect the most vulnerable and the marginalized in society, regardless who they are, Muslims or non-Muslims, or what kind of Muslims they are. That is the core of Islamic liberation theology. Yeah? And finally, if you accept religious pluralism, you are going to, and you say that, truth, you make a distinction between truth with a capital T and your own subjective truth, then, religious considerations of truth are not part of the political discourses and political decision-making. They are, they operate in the realm of theology, and they do not have a place in a civil society. They do not have a direct bearing upon what kind of rights and responsibilities citizens of these states have. Yeah. So there are many other reasons as to why progressive Islam can contribute towards Islamic ecumenism, but this is all the time that I have, and I look forward to your thoughts and questions.